All right, let's talk about something we've all felt. That little bit of panic when you're working on a big project, you glance over at the calendar, and that deadline just seems to be screaming at you.
Yeah, that project deadline, the one that's written in stone and just kind of looms over everything you do.
And somehow, it always feels like it's getting closer way, way faster than you thought. So here's the big question. What if you could do more than just meet it? What if you could actually beat the clock? Let's get into it. First things first, let's get one thing straight. Shortening a project timeline isn't always about being in panic mode. It's not just damage control. Sometimes it's actually a super smart strategic play to get ahead. I mean, look at all these reasons. Maybe you're trying to launch a product before your competition. That's a huge one. Or, hey, maybe there's a nice little bonus in your contract for finishing early. On the flip side, you definitely want to avoid those late penalties, right? And sometimes you just want to wow your client by delivering way ahead of schedule. The big idea here is that going faster can be a powerful offensive move, not just a defense against failure. Okay, so how do we actually pull this off? Well, let's start with the most straightforward tactic, throwing more resources at the problem. This is your power play, the move you make when you've got the budget to back it up. The playbook here is pretty simple, really. You can just add more people to the tasks that are holding things up. Or you could outsource some of the work to a team that specializes in it. Scheduling overtime is always a popular one, but you've got to be careful with that. It can lead to burnout and, sloppy work. A great option, if you can swing it, is to create a dedicated core team that lives and breathes the project. And I love this one, the do-it-twice approach. You build a quick and dirty version first to get it out there. Then you go back and build the real polished one. All of these are awesome, powerful options, but yeah, they're going to cost you. But what happens when you don't have a bottomless budget? Well, that's when things get really interesting. This is where we move from just throwing money at it to making some truly strategic, clever moves. This is the real art of project management. Okay, first up, we've got something called fast tracking. This is basically the art of doing things in parallel that you'd normally do one after another. So instead of finishing step A completely before starting step B, maybe you start B when A is about 3/4 of the way done. It's a fantastic way to shrink the schedule without touching the scope. And then there's crashing. Now, this sounds a little like our earlier add resources tactic, but it's much more surgical. You're not just adding people willy-nilly. You're laser focusing those extra resources only on the tasks that are on the critical path. That's the longest chain of tasks that determines the project's finish date. The goal is to shorten that specific chain, and by doing so, shorten the whole project. And this right here is the heart of the matter. Look at this trade-off. With fast tracking, you're not adding direct costs, which sounds great, right? But the catch is you're taking on a ton of risk. Because if you overlap tasks and something goes wrong in that first task, you might have to redo a bunch of work. Crashing, on the other hand, costs you money up front, but is generally a safer bet. And notice, in both cases, you're not changing the scope. You're still delivering the same thing, just faster. And here's a perfect example of what that looks like in the real world. This is fast tracking in action. By using something called start-to-start lags, which is just a fancy way of saying task B can start a few days after task A begins. They were able to get tasks to overlap. Just look at that Gantt chart. They chopped a whole 15 days off the project schedule. That's huge. And they did it without adding a dime to the direct costs. We've got a few more moves in our back pocket, too. The most powerful, and sometimes the most difficult, is just reducing the project's scope. If you can get everyone to agree to drop a feature or two, boom, you save a ton of time. Then there are some really advanced techniques like critical chain management, where you basically consolidate all your safety time into these shared buffers to protect the deadline. And then there's the nuclear option, compromising on quality. Seriously, you should only even think about this as an absolute last resort. All right, so we've just gone through all these awesome ways to speed things up, but here comes the reality check. There's no such thing as a free lunch, right? Going faster isn't magic. It always, always has a cost, and every single one of these tactics comes with its own set of risks. This chart tells the whole story. See that dip in the middle? That's the sweet spot. For this project, the cheapest way to get it done is to take about 17 or 18 weeks. If you try to go faster, if you crash it, look how your direct costs skyrocket. And if you let it drag on too long, your indirect costs, like salaries and rent, just keep adding up. Pushing for speed almost always means you're moving away from that optimal low-cost point. So let's break down those risks. When you rush, you're essentially burning up all your project's built-in flexibility, all that wiggle room or slack. Your schedule becomes super fragile, like a house of cards. One little hiccup can bring the whole thing down. And what's wild is that by compressing the schedule, you can accidentally create new critical paths. Suddenly, tasks that weren't a big deal are now mission critical. It's a high-stakes game for sure.
So, with all this complexity and risk, how do you even manage it? Well, you can't just wing it. To accelerate a project successfully, you have to have a rock-solid foundation. You got to nail the fundamentals of project management first. Think of it this way. These tools give you the control you need to pull off those high-risk, high-reward moves.
And it all begins right here with the Work Breakdown Structure, or WBS for short. This is basically the blueprint for your entire project. It takes the huge, overwhelming goal and breaks it down into smaller, manageable chunks. The WBS is all about answering one critical question. What are we actually doing here?
So, once the WBS tells you what needs to get done, the project network diagram tells you when. This is where you map everything out. You see how all those pieces from the WBS connect, which tasks depend on others, and, most importantly, it reveals that critical path we keep talking about. That's your project's true timeline.
And that leads us to maybe the most important concept of all for this topic, Slack. You might also hear it called float. This is your project's buffer. It's the wiggle room. It's the amount of time a task can be delayed without messing up the final deadline. And here's the kicker. Every single speed-up tactic we've talked about, from fast-tracking to crashing, works by eating up that slack. And that right there is why it's so risky. So, let's bring it all home. When you think about your next project, remember this. Accelerating isn't just about flooring it. It's about making deliberate, strategic choices. It's a constant balancing act between cost, risk, scope, and quality. So the final question for you is this. Are you just going to race the clock, or are you going to manage it?